Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Welcome to the second annual beginning, and we have no formats, and I'd like to introduce you to our retreat master, Gene Duffy.
My name is Gene, and I too am an alcoholic. And whenever I identify myself as an alcoholic, I base that identification on how I interpret the definition of the word alcoholic as it's defined in the 3rd chapter of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. In that chapter it says that we alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. And that's all it says. It doesn't make any reference to how much we drank, what we drank, or what happened as a result of our drinking, where we went. And it doesn't say in order to qualify as an alcoholic or a member of AA, you got to do hard time, jail time, county time, and be in DTs a few times, and have convulsions and seizures, and drink wine, and marry the same woman 3 times, and all of these things that seem to be part of the events surrounding a lot of drinking, you know. I try to keep it as simple as I can, you know. I have no problems now accepting the fact that as an alcoholic I have lost the ability to control my drinking. This is a new experience really for me. I certainly had no idea what this was going to be all about, and we don't have any time limit, and I sure as hell don't want to talk here all night or anything like that. I want to sort of create something that we can all get involved, because I'm beginning to feel pretty high about this, because things have come to pass since I got here at noon, and I've heard a few things and talked over a few things, and we've had quite a few little meetings, armchair type meetings, arm's length, or whatever you want to call it, and I'm getting hyped up. When I was asked to come here, it happened just about a year ago. I'm from Northern California. I live in the wine country in the Napa Valley in a little town called Calistoga, which has only 1,100 people in it. It's the kind of a town you'd expect to see Tom Sawyer walking down the damn street or something like that. I'm not trying to sound commercial. I'm just here because we're a bunch of guys here for the weekend, so I want you to know exactly where I come from and why I'm here. You know, I own and operate a recovery house, you know. It's no big deal. It's no comp care facility or anything like that. We handle 50 people, 30 guys and 20 men. I have no big formal program. Everything is AA. There's 42 AA meetings there a week, and you have a choice, you know. You either go to the AA meetings or to the Greyhound bus. It's that I don't have it complicated. I'm not telling you any of these things for commercial reasons. I just, you know, want to get acquainted, that's all. I've been up there for 18 years doing that, and I've been very, very fortunate these past 18 years to have been asked to participate in many of the AA activities here in Southern California, and I have a wealth of what I consider very good friends here in Southern California, and I've always enjoyed the vitality and that exists in AA here in Southern California. I say it all over the country, and I get in a lot of trouble with it sometimes, you know, because technically, if you really want to know the truth, AAs from California aren't really that welcome all over the country. Everybody sort of looks at us as a bunch of fucking freaks, you know, and that's really the truth. But it seems that most of the so-called circuit speakers come from California, and that's not because they're knowledgeable. It's just because they get more practice out here, I guess. So people usually are down on Californians, and I'm always expounding Californians. I say, boy, you come out to California, they got a kind of AA out there that's exciting as hell. And that's true. There's so much vitality in AA here, you know. And when you take California, you can even cut it down closer and say Southern California, because, Jesus, you've got it here, you know. If I ever had to leave where I live, I'd want to be part of this particular group, to tell you the honest goodness truth. You've got what I was looking for when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I just said it to a few boys here before the meeting. You know, if all that sobriety was to me right now was that 4 or 5 times a week I was going to some church basement to eat them friggin' cookies and drink that shitty coffee and sit around in chairs like this and listen to our bullshit over and over again, screw it. And I really say that from the bottom of my heart, and I hope you'll understand what I'm saying. Because I didn't stop drinking to stop living. I stopped drinking to live. Because I was told that this was a program designed for a new way of life, and I was told that by Bill Wilson. And it's been since printed in a book as Bill sees it. He said, Duff, this is a program designed for people who want to live without benefit of drinking. And that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted. Drinking was the only apparent problem I had in my life. My life seemed to be good based on my values, but when I drank, it got screwed up. And I wanted that, and I've been an action guy all of my life. All of my life I've been an action guy. I always want to be where things are going on and where things are happening, you know. Good or bad, I want to be there, you know. And I want to have a reason to get up in the morning, you know. My bunkie over here and I were just talking about it before, about what a horrible feeling it must be to not have a purpose in life, you know. How would you like to wake up in the morning and have nothing to do? No reason for being. In other words, the world isn't going to change one goddamn bit today on account of you, you know. I don't want to take on the whole world's problems, I assure you of that. But Jesus, I want to be counted, you know. I want to have a purpose. I want to have a reason for living. And so all of this creates a lot of excitement. And my idea of excitement is not Oreo cookies, coffee, and church basements, you know. So I had to find what you guys have apparently found here in this kind of a situation. A weekend retreat up here in this beautiful Palms to the Pines Highway area. I know this area well. I used to drive back and forth here many, many times, you know. And you have other things. I'm going to be at a convention you have next weekend in Universal City, and then you have a Palm Springs Roundup, and you have these Southern California conventions, and Keith put on a big convention down in San Diego 2 years. There seems to be always some goddamn thing going on here. You just don't do things normal here. You know, I came down to speak last Wednesday, I think it was, in Long Beach for the Longshoremen's Union. We get a lot of longshoremen go through my program. It's a pretty macho program, you know, and hard-nosed, and we don't get too many clerk types. We get law enforcement officers and get the Maritime Division, the Standard Oil, and the guys off of the oil rigs, and longshoremen, them kind of guys. And they had the AA meeting on the Princess Louise, you know, a little old goddamn boat, but it was different. Yeah, everybody else has AA meetings in churches. These guys have it on a goddamn ship that's anchored to a dock, which was fun. Now, I was asked because I had been down to Laguna Niguel, I believe it was, and I had gone down there to talk at something, and I've known Keith Drum since he came to this program, and his lovely wife, and there he was, you know, as usual, with 5 or 6 new guys around him, and there appeared to be about 10 of them there, and we all chatted. I don't know whether it was during the meeting or after the meeting or what, and somebody made mention of a retreat next February, a year from then, you know, and said, would you come? Well, all I was thinking of was these 10 guys, you know, and Keith, you know, he said, we're going to meet up there in Idlewild. And I said, yes. And when I was met this morning by Marv over there at the plane in Orange County, that's what I figured, you know, me and Marv and Keith and 8 or 9 other guys, you know. And when I get up here and I hear this, and this is something you ought to be proud of, because you don't see this very often. I don't know how many of you there, 60, 65 men in AA. You can't go too many places in the United States and get 65 men to come together on a weekend like this for a thing about AA. You know, maybe if you're talking about new forms of oral sex or different versions of it, that's a goddamn place. But this is great. And I couldn't help but notice all day long, you know. And it wasn't something that was strange. I sort of expected to see it because I know some of you guys, you know. I know Don, and like I say, I know Keith, and I know how they operate. I know what kind of AA guys there are. But all day long I could see it, you know. I see the younger guys coming in and how they listen. This is the thing that's impressed me so much here, you know. When it seems that when one of you older members talk, or even me, you know, Jesus Christ, you're on us like a bunch of leeches, you know. Believe me, gentlemen, you don't see that all that often. You don't see that enough, as far as I'm concerned. And it makes you feel good, because these are people who want to hear, you know, who want to hear. They're not them assholes who come to goddamn meetings and sit back there and every 15 seconds they're looking at their friggin' watch, scratching their ass, wishing the goddamn meeting was over, and you'd like to pick up the friggin' podium and throw it at them, you know? And so that's good. And you know, the chairman said he didn't have a format. Shit, I ain't got a format either, you know. Guy gives me a little program today. He says, here, you know, it's a program. It says something about sponsorship, something about God and all of that. I didn't give him any information on any of those things. They just went ahead and wrote it. So, you know, I'm just here, really not as a master, not as the retreat master. You know, I'm just here as another guy, and through some mistake, you're going to have me talk at 4 meetings, I guess. That's about what the hell it is, you know. If you're looking for any big words of wisdom, you know, you better go to somebody else. And the first one of you that thinks you're going to bother me by coming over while I'm taking a nap and say, I'd like to take the 5th step with you, I'm going to kick you in the friggin' head, because I don't want to hear your 5th step and all that shit. And I don't want to be nobody's sponsor in here. See, I'm a lousy sponsor, you know, and I live too far away from you. You know, I'm a 1-year sponsor. The people I work with, and I only take 6 at a time, you know, it's for 1 year. Because that's all I know. I don't know the new kind, that's not a really new kind of AA, but I'm not up to date on the nomenclature and the way you talk. I don't know what you mean by needing more space and depressions and all that, you know. I know about getting the puke off of your shoes, you know, and that it's really not tasting it when it's up here, it's smelling it, you know, and I can get a guy through a year, you know, because it takes me usually a year to get him through the 12 steps or the 12 positions, and then I turn him over, to what I call an alumnus. And an alumnus is a guy that I've sponsored before, is doing pretty good. Then I turn him over to them. And then they get into the in-space and all of that stuff because they know about it. But sponsorship, you know, I have to know about it. You all have to know about it, you know. For years, you know, people would say to me, what's the most important part of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous? You usually get asked this by guys who are trying to become instant old-timers, you know. They want to know the most important part, and then they'll do that, and then they're ready to speak in Madison Square Garden, you know. Well, for many, many years, I used to say sponsorship is the most important part, until finally, as it's wont to happen so many times in AA, I sat in a meeting, and I guess we all hear the 5th chapter read over and over again, and I'm usually figuring up my overtime or my income tax or something I got to do next week when they read the 5th chapter. Very seldom do I pay attention to it, you know. But this one particular night, you know, I was sort of listening to it, and when they got to the 3 pertinent ideas at the end of the 5th chapter, I listened probably for the first time in a long time. And then I understood what is, in my opinion, the most important part of our program, because it's flatly stated right there in those 3 pertinent ideas, without any kind of doubt at all. It says in the second of them ideas, you know, that we believe that no human power to relieve our alcoholism. And then in the third, they make two very definite statements, the closest thing to a guarantee in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we must always remember whose words those are. The words in those books are our words. Guys like you and I wrote those words. And many of them were agnostic, many of them were atheists. They were all a mixture just like we are. And when the book was written, it was agreed by all of those people that nothing would go in that book without the unanimous approval of the entire body. So that meant the words that I'm about to read to you were approved by atheists and agnostics. So after the second of those ideas said that we believe no human power could relieve our alcoholism, they made that definite statement. But God could and would. And they named him God. They didn't say it was a tree trunk or a chair or something out there. They said God. They gave him a name. They didn't tell you you had to believe him or accept him or anything like that, but they told you the answer. They said, but God could and would. That was the guarantee. And then they put it right back on you if he was sought. It was your choice or my choice, my decision or your decision. And so the people who wrote that book, told me right then and there that that must be the most important thing. That there has to come a time, and I have to accept this power greater than myself called God, That if no human power could relieve my alcoholism, that eliminates the doctor, the physician, the shrink, the priest, the sponsor, Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob, even me. Any of us who are mortal, it eliminates. I cannot do it. I had to reach out for this power. So I stopped saying that sponsorship was the most important part of the program, with reluctance. Because I had a very valid argument for saying that sponsorship is the most important, and I still believe it. Now, the original pamphlet, Questions and Answers on Sponsorship, the green and white one, the original one on the very first page went something like this. It said, sponsorship is the heart of the AA approach to recovery, and that sponsorship is a two-edged sword, proving that many times the older member needs the newer member just as much as the newer member needs the older member. But they called it the heart, and that was the word that caught me. The most vital organ in our body is the heart. Without the heart, we die. There is no me or you without a heart. So here, if these guys were saying that sponsorship is the heart of this program, they were telling me that without this thing called sponsorship, we die. And what is sponsorship? Sponsorship is nothing more than a basic concept of Alcoholics Anonymous. One alcoholic sharing his or her experience with another alcoholic. That's the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous. Certainly without that, you don't have AA. AA is not an educational program to teach you the 12 suggested steps to recovery. AA is not a crisis station to handle calls to go out and save drunks. AA is a program designed for a new way of life by the sharing of these experiences, one alcoholic with another. But sponsorship is a tough thing because it introduces right to us when we're new something that the alcoholic always has difficulty in accepting. It introduces humility. And for a bunch of self-centered sons of bitches like me and you, when we come to this program, humility is the furthest thing in the world from our grasp. And yet it's almost the first thing that we're asked to do. I have to ask somebody for help. Jesus Christ, how could I do that? You got a guy down here in Clancy, and I know Clancy for years, and I've been on a lot of programs with him, and I heard him once say something that, Jesus, I live by, because it furnishes the evidence, the proof, if you have the capacity to be honest, as to whether or not you need help. And I think this was in Omaha, Nebraska, where he said this, because he was full of hate. He was pissed off at somebody in that audience or something, And he was almost talking to this guy, you know. And I can see him as plain as day right now. And he was almost pointing. And he says, if you don't think you need help, think of what your life situation is right now. And only you know your life situation, where you are right now. And do you realize that where you are right now is a direct result of your best effort? Wow. Man, that's a heavy load if you get honest. If you're sitting out there and you're sitting in a recovery house and you've been fucking around in there for 45 days, and the farthest you come on AA, you're trying to make the secretary, you know, or some shit like that, and you've been smoking somebody else's cigarette and using another guy's razor, and you haven't had a piece of your own clothes on for 3 years, you ain't doing so goddamn good, you know. You ain't doing so good, you know. And only you realize that, and see. So then you say, maybe, if I'm honest, well, maybe I need some help. Maybe I need some help. Maybe I'm powerless over alcohol. Maybe I have lost the ability to control my drinking. Well, it tells us right in that book, you know. We conceded, it says. We conceded to our innermost self. And always we have to remember that that's who we have to do business with. The biggest mistake that we can make in AA is trying to include other people in our recovery. This is a personal thing between you and you. It says we concede to our innermost self, me, that I was an alcoholic. We don't do it to the boss to please him or the wife or my buddies or my aunt or my uncle. Me. Concede to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic, that I had lost this ability to control my drinking. And they say if you can do that, that's the first step towards your recovery, the very first step. But it's a tough one. It's admitting a weakness right off the bat, and nobody likes to do that. But, you know, that's not odd. Very first sentence in that same chapter says, none of us was willing to admit, you know, that we were real alcoholics, you know. Because nobody likes to think that he or she is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. And so we get to have a lot of don'ts come into our life. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. Well, sometimes, you know, you coddle somebody. Say, oh, yeah, you got to take them steps. Oh, yeah, you got to go to meetings. And that didn't seem to work. So that's where that tough love came in then, you know. And I think the very first time I ever heard that was directed right at me. And by the guy who was to become my sponsor, which, if time permits, I'd like to tell you about that. You know, I said, I don't want to go to that friggin' meeting, and I don't want to, you know, and I'm expecting him to argue with me over it, you know, so I expect him to give me that baby shit again. Oh, come on, you know, we'll have coffee and pie, yeah. But no, he was a hard-nosed son of a bitch, you know. He said, hey, let me tell you something, hotshot. He said, you don't have to go to no meetings. And he said, you don't have to read the book, you don't have to take the steps, you don't have to do nothing. You can stay right there in that pile of shit you're standing in. Who cares? And, you know, that wasn't what I wanted to hear, you know. What the fuck are you talking about? You're not supposed to be that hard on me. And thank God he was like that, you know. I'm a strong believer. And tough love really isn't as tough as it sounds, you know, and it certainly is not new to AA. Tough love has been in your life since you were that high. The first instance of tough love you've ever had was generated to you either by your mother or your father. You see, and tough love is when maybe some of you lived in a house when you was little kids, and on a Saturday afternoon you're playing out there in the backyard and your father pokes his head out the door and says, Charlie, get down out of that tree before you break your ass. And you hate him for that. All he's trying to do is keep you from breaking your ass. Or your mother says, don't go out in the rain unless you got your rubbers on. Goddamn fucking rubbers, yeah. She just don't want you to get your feet wet. Expressing love. But we don't understand it because we're immature. And we don't really know a definition of the word love. There's so many different definitions of word love, and we've used them all. You know, a lot of us think love means the right key to a motel or Saturday night, the back seat of a car or whatever thing. I've learned about love sort of different here lately, and ironically it was introduced to me in a gay type atmosphere up in San Francisco because I was having a little problem with the gay lifestyle. It just has never been part of my life, and I don't say that to make fun, you know. It's just, you know, I'm uncomfortable around it, and I had been asked to, you know, participate in some AA meetings up there that are they're gay meetings. I can't change the name, but that's all they are, and I didn't want to go. And I'd lie about it, you know. I'd say to the guy, geez, I'd like to come, but I'm going someplace else that Thursday night. And, well, finally, one smart bastard, you know, he said, look, I've just been elected secretary for a year. He said, pick out a Tuesday in the next year. Well, you know, what the hell have I got to say? So I went to my sponsor, Paul Gardner, and I said, Paul, what the hell am I going to do, you know? And it was a big problem to me. And then he shut me up, see, and like sponsors do, you know. He said, what they asked you to talk about? Homosexuality? And I said, no, they want me to chair a meeting. And he said, well, then go there and chair a meeting. And that's all they asked me to do. They didn't ask me to drink out of their cups or to kiss them on the lips or wear lipstick or any goddamn thing, you know. And that's when I learned how I could accept them under this definition of love that I understand now. You see, love to me now is my genuine concern for the well-being of another. That's why I can love a man now and not be ashamed of it, because I'm genuinely concerned about your well-being. That's why if this was my home group, I'd wonder where's John tonight? He's not here. Why is that chair empty? See, I'd be concerned about the guy that should be sitting there. Or I might say, where the hell were you last Thursday night? You all right? You having any problem? That's a genuine concern for the well-being of another. And that kind of love has to be tough. Here, maybe I can explain it a little bit better, seeing where we are right now, you know. We're in a very fantastic sort of a, you know, area right now. Driving up here, it's a beautiful sight to see, you know, looking down off of the San Bernardino and San Jacinto Mountain here, you know, and the air is clear and it's quiet, and hell, this isn't too hard to take. Imagine if you had the dough. You saw these beautiful homes as you came in here. It wouldn't have been nice to have a home like that. Probably everybody is it. Jesus Christ, wish I had one of them, you know. Well, imagine that you did. Imagine you got one now and you're living in it. And it's yours. And here you are, it's Saturday, and you're off work today, and the wife's gone over to see her mother, and she's left you home to watch your little son, who's 3 years old, and it's sort of a cool, brisk sort of a day up here, and it does snow up here quite a bit. It might even snow tonight. And let's say so, in order to keep the house warm, you got a big fireplace like this up there, and you load it all up, and you got your son playing around down there on the floor, and his little rompers on, playing with his knockout tools, you know, and you got the thermostat set at 72 because you love this little kid. You don't want him to be cold or get any drafts, so you keep the room nice and warm. And you're sitting in here really enjoying life, you know, and you look out this window, and if it was daylight, you'd see all of them sequoias out there, them pines, them jack pines out there. It looked beautiful, you know. Maybe the snow would start coming down now, sort of dancing down, little flakes, you know, virgin snow, and maybe just make a meadow out there. Got a mark on it, you know, maybe a little deer track through there or something like that. And it would be so beautiful, you know, because you love this little child. You'd want him to see that. You'd want him to experience being out there in the snow and then feeling a snowflake on his nose for the first time in his life. You'd want to put him out in the snow. But you're sure as hell not going to put him out there in that little snow, little romper he's got on, because he'd catch a cold, you know. And you love him, so you don't want him to get sick. So you prepare him for the cold. Maybe you go to the closet and you get a little snow suit. Now, I don't know how many of you know about snow suits, you guys that are native to California, but I raised 3 boys in northern Illinois. I know a lot about snowsuits. And there's really an art to putting on snowsuits. What you gotta do is you gotta sit down. You sit down when you gotta put it on. Then you gotta turn the kid with his ass to you. And then you lock him in your knees like a vice. You get him in there. Then you take the snowsuit, you put one leg in and you hitch it up like that. Then you take his other leg and you put it in and you hitch it up like that. Then you grab both sides and pull it up over his ass. And now you got to match 2 3-year-old arms with 2 sleeves. And that gets a little frustrating. He's up here and you're down here. And then you try to catch him and he goes like that, you know. And he smiles and giggles at you and you go like that, you know. And that goes on for a little while, yeah. And pretty soon you get a little hot in the ass, you know. You get a little frustrated. All of a sudden, bang, you say, stand still, you son of a bitch, before I kill you. And that little kid freezes in terror. Scared to death. And while he's froze, you put that arm on. That arm on. You zip him up, tie the hood, and you put him out in the snow. Fully protected because of your love. And outside he's saying, boy, get rid of that son of a bitch. I want to live with my grandmother. I hate my father, you know. And that's because he doesn't understand. And it's the same thing when you come in here new. All of a sudden you don't understand the sponsor, you know. 90 what? In 90 days? Take what? Go where? Shut up! I've always said one of the clues to having a good sponsor is that on a lot of occasions you'd like to see him drop dead. You know, and that certainly was true with me. I hated the man who was my sponsor. I hated him tremendously even before he became my sponsor. I know now, of course, why I did, and everybody should if they had the same problem. Because, you see, he represented what I wanted to be, and I wasn't. And that's why I hated him. He was the proof that this program worked, even though I said it didn't. And for that, I hated him. I met him in not such a strange way. Many of us meet our sponsors the way I did. I met him in an institution while I was an inmate in this particular institution. He was active on what they call hospital and institutional work. Backbone of AA, as far as I'm concerned. I spent 14 great years in H&I work, you know. And you know, he used to come to this place every Sunday night. Him and 4 other jerks, I used to call them, from Chicago. He used to drive out to this town called Elgin, Illinois. About 60 miles out, you know, in the rain and the snow. And I figured, why, you dumb assholes, you know. And they used to bring chicken shit stuff like chocolate chip cookies and open packs of cigarettes, Lucy's, and in the summertime they'd have gallon thermos jugs of strawberry Kool-Aid and crap like that. Your values sort of change when you're in them institutions. And I hated him. I hated him. I was sort of a hot shot on the ward there because I was one of the real alcoholics. A lot of the other people were really mentally ill. But they sent everybody to these meetings anyhow, whether they were carrying eggs or come from Fantasy Island or whatever the hell it was. You know, everybody went to the AA meeting. And usually in this group there'd be about 60 of us, I guess, and maybe there'd be 5 alkies off of the street or something, and the rest were severely, you know, disturbed people who I certainly am not trying to make any fun of, you know. And we go to the meetings, and I was sort of the leader, you know, the big shot on the ward. I was the best pinochle player, and I was the best ping pong player, and I had the inn with the nurse, and I had the corner bunk in the ward, and I knew where to get instant coffee and all of them chicken shit things that give you some sort of prestige when you're in, you know, the yo-yo squad. And I used to get selected for the honorable jobs like being in charge of taking the group to the AA meeting. I used to have honors like that when I was drinking. You two did, I guess, you know. I used to think it was a big deal to hang around a saloon, and especially when the owner would ask you to hard-boil the eggs, you know. Think, son of a bitch, I'm a big shot. He asked me to hard-boil the eggs. Or give me one of them quarters, you know, with the lipstick on it and say, play 3 songs. I figured he figured I had good musical taste or some shit like that. You know? And the reason you look good is because you've got no competition, you know. When you're the only sane guy there and the other guys are pretty sick, you know, it's easy to look good. I was the captain of the ward baseball team, you know, and we had a first baseman who used to go through shock therapy, you know. Always about 45 minutes before our games, you know. He'd stand there on first base, you know. I'd be scooping him up, you know. Shit. Used to play ping pong with guys like that. So, of course, my ego was way up high in a situation like that. But then on that Sunday nights when I had to go over there with them AA guys was around, and that sort of brought me back to reality because there was something for them mentally ill people to compare me with. You know, these guys that come in from the outside. And my sponsor always wore a blue suit, a white shirt, and a maroon tie, and he had silver hair, and it was a crew cut, and he looked like he could just come back from Miami Beach. And he was the vice president of the locomotive division of General Motors in LaGrange, Illinois. And I hated him. I used to wish he'd die. I called him the Gray Eagle. And the only defense that we alcoholics have in situations like that is to really display what we really have become, pathological liars. You see, we have to lie to defend ourselves. In order for me to look good, I had to lie about that son of a bitch, you know. And man, I knew the lies, you know. I'd tell all of my little group, my little army, I said, don't listen to what them guys tell you. I'll give you the inside dope. Last Sunday, after they left this meeting, they all got drunk and were locked up. The reason they come out here on Sundays is they're not allowed to go to AA meetings in Chicago because they all drink. And here's all of my guys going, they didn't give a goddamn. And that's how it was. That's how it was. And it went on like that for about 2 or 3 years. 2 or 3 years. Every Sunday night it was the same thing, and I was in and out of that hospital. I've got 32 admissions to that hospital, you know. Some were only for a day, some was twice in one day, you know. But 32 different times I went through that whole crap, you know. And then eventually it happened to me, and thank God it did. One night after having gone right through the meeting and telling all my lies and all of my bullshit and collecting my cigarettes and my cookies and my Kool-Aid, and I got my little army together, we're walking back to the ward. And I'm expounding at length about these assholes from Chicago, lying like hell about them, lying about the Gray Eagle, when all of a sudden, from way in the back of the group, another alcoholic, not a mentally ill guy, another alcoholic said the words that I couldn't afford to hear. He said, hey, Duffy, why don't you smarten up? You've been lying about Bob for 3 years. And that guy's been here every Sunday night. You're a phony son of a bitch. Wow. Even now, them guys knew me. Everybody knew me now. Well, it wasn't enough really to get me upset, but it got me to thinking. It got me to thinking about things that I thought I'd never do in AA. And I went back to the meeting 2 weeks later. with sort of a different attitude, not a great, genuine attitude, but was an attitude that maybe you should listen. You know, after all, you're not doing so good. You're not even 30 years old yet, and you spent half of your life, for Christ's sake, in institutions. And so I sort of listened, and the format for that meeting was first 10 minutes, they'd have some kid that just got out of the hospital, been out about 90 days, and then next guy would talk for about 15 minutes, and he was a guy that had been out a year. Then they'd have about a 10 to 15-minute coffee break, and then the last hour would be some generalissimo, you know, with 3,000 years of sobriety, and get up and beat the hell out of their desk and talk, you know. Well, it was during the coffee break that God sent me the message or created the greatest scenario that will ever take place in my life. It was sort of set up like this. Up in the front was 2 overstuffed couches that somebody, I guess, had donated. And behind these couches were long tables like those over there. And that's where they put the punch and the coffee and the cookies and shit like that. Well, the AA guys from Chicago were standing around those tables talking. And I was sitting in one of the couches up front. So I could hear what they was talking about. I wasn't really paying that much attention because it was the coffee break. But they were talking about Robert Ripley, the believe it or not guy. And so every now and then I'd catch it, you know. They were talking about different formations in nature that had been created. One guy said he had seen a tree that had grown into an exact duplicate of the Indian head on the Indian head nickel. And another guy had seen a rock formation down in Sedona, Arizona that appeared to be the Winchester Cathedral or Westminster Abbey or some damn thing like that. So I was sort of just listening to them. And then all of a sudden the gray eagle opens his mouth. And he said, well, you guys will never believe this. He says, but I saw a figure 8 cracked in a sewer tile. And boy, my head went up like a chicken in the yard, you know, like that. Now, maybe I should explain that to some of you who may not be familiar with construction. Sewer tile, incidentally, in the Middle West is different than here in California. In California, you make it out of concrete. And genuine sewer tile in the Middle West is made out of vitreous clay that's baked in kilns, and it comes out as brittle as glass. It's made out of clay. And to take a hammer and slap a piece of clay tile and crack it in a perfect figure 8 would be just as impossible, or seem to be, as me tapping this glass here right now. And instead of it breaking through, just a figure 8 crack. That's just how extremely, almost hopeless it is to expect that to be done. But I knew it was possible because I had seen it. I had seen it. I had seen that sewer tile cracked in a figure 8. And I turned around to make sure that I heard who said that, and there it was, the vice president of General Motors. So I waited till the end of the meeting with a lot of apprehension because I wanted to blast his ass wide open, you know. I figured somebody had told him that story and he was going to tell it now and sound like a big, hard-time alcoholic, you know. Because there are guys like that. They lie like hell from these podiums, some of these guys, to create a story, you know. And I figured that's what he had done. I sent my group back to the ward with somebody else, and I went out to the parking lot and I waited for Bob to come. And he was always the last guy out, always had the little cardboard box with the literature in it, the gavel in it, and the AA shit that he had in there. And so he saw me standing there, and he knew me. Christ, he knew me for 3 or 4 years. And he's always nice to me, always gave me extra cigarettes, always said anything I can do for you, enough to help you out or something, you know. He'd give me a quarter every now and then. And so he just said, hi, how's it going? What's up? And there's something I can do for you? And I said, yeah. I says, I didn't want to embarrass you at that meeting. I said, but you're a lying son of a bitch. And I was mad. He said, what the hell are you talking about? I said, I'm going to ask you a question right now. And I said, if you're so goddamn honest, tell me the truth. And he says, fire away. I said, I heard you guys talking tonight, I says, about them formations, and nature and stuff like that. And he said, oh, it's good. It's interesting, wasn't it? And I said, it wasn't until I heard you come out with the bullshit. I says, who told you? I says, about the figure 8. And then he looked at me with that look that you guys know, that you see in AA. When them old-timers look right back at you and they know they got you. They know they got it. Because he put on that shit-eating grin, you know. And he says, why, did you see it too? And I says, I certainly did. I said, but you didn't see it where I saw it. And I was expecting him to say, well, no, I heard it at an AA meeting or some guy told me. And then he said a word to me that has meant my life. That won't mean nothing to any of you in here unless you're from Chicago Skid Row. He said, Rothschilds. Well, I could have dropped dead. Rothschilds is probably the scummiest saloon I've ever been in my life. It's the filthiest, rottenest pig pen that exists on the face of this earth. It's just a wine joint on West Madison Street in Chicago. A crud is all the hell it is. And that was sort of one of my hangouts. Now, I'm not too proud of what I'm going to tell you, but you know, we got to share these things. What was supposed to be a men's room in Rothschild's was just the backyard. As you walked out the back door, on the left they piled all beer cases, the empty beer cases. And if you went to the end of the yard, there was a piece of corrugated steel across the back. And down at the bottom of the corrugated steel, this is a big con job. He gives me this because he wants to change. Ice cold coffee. You know? All set? And this corrugated steel was across the back. And I guess at some time or another, they must have been putting in a new sewer system right down Madison Street. Now, the sewer tiles, when they're whole, the big ones for the city are usually about 3 foot in diameter. Great big round things. Well, I suppose they either stole these or made some kind of arrangements, but they had 8 of them, actually 4 round tiles brought in, and then they split them right down the middle like you would split a 55-gallon drum from top to bottom. And then they turned them 2 and pushed them up against this corrugated steel, so they represented a urinal, individual urinals. And at the bottom was a trough hand dug in the concrete with a pick, I guess. And that's where the sewage went on out and went out into the Chicago sewer system some way. At the bottom, for sanitary reasons, I guess to satisfy some kind of an inspector at some time or another, this is all just what I imagine. They had put disinfectant blocks in little wire cages so that when you'd urinate, your urine would run down through the cage and pass through the blocks. Now, them cages were about a foot above the trough. I don't know if this is how it happened. But I and a lot of other guys have thought this over for years and years, and it's the most logical explanation that we could have. And West Madison Street, I guess, is no different than any other Skid Row area in any major city. There's a lot of manpower hired by the day, by the hour, right off of the street, and it's certainly not uncommon in Chicago. One of the biggest and best jobs by the day is working at the steel mills, which are all around Chicago, in Indiana and South Chicago. Working what they call the slag piles. Now, the slag piles are the clinkers, the cold clinkers that come out of the furnaces and are shot up out of chutes, and they form great massive piles of these. And then they go off on a little conveyor, and they get ground up into cinders, and they go off to a concrete block plant, and they make cinder blocks out of them. Well, working the tops of these piles is the job that they serve for the alcoholics, because them coals are still hot as they're coming out. But 2 or 3 guys have to stand up there all the time with big number 9 scoop shovels to keep the top from going into the funnel and plugging it up. So it's really not a hard job, except that it's hard on your feet, and you got that shovel, but the money was good. Now, in order to beat the government, I guess, or beat the time, in order to work in the steel mills, you have to wear safety shoes. Probably some of you guys are familiar with that right around here. Got to have them steel-tipped shoes, or you can't work. Well, I guess at one time, when they'd hire guys off of Skid Row, they'd have to run them through that process in the personnel department, go get them fitted for a shoe, and lose maybe an hour and a half's time. So I suppose some smart son of a bitch in that steel mill said, I got a better idea. Let's donate to the charities on Skid Row steel-tipped shoes. That way we can write them all off as a deduction, and every guy on Skid Row will have steel-tipped shoes, which is the truth. And they all cost about $140 a piece. And so everybody's running around with these steel-tipped shoes on. Now, I guess most of you know that public restrooms have been used by many of us as places to vent our frustrations and our anger. It's not uncommon to walk into a public restroom and see where somebody's punched a hole in the wall or pulled a towel rack off or something. And that's the only thing I think could have happened there. I think somebody had walked out there one day just full of that anger, you know. Take a piss or to throw up or whatever the hell he was going to do. And as he stood there in front of them urinals, in front of their trough, he looked around for something to punch. And he probably saw that corrugated steel and thought twice about that. Figured that'd be ridiculous. And then looked around and there was no walls there to punch. And he was looking for something. And he must have spotted that wire cage. And he must have figured, I'll kick that fucking thing off of there. And he took his foot back and he gave it one hell of a shot. And he missed it. And his toe went right underneath that cage and cracked that tile, and it's a perfect figure eight as any guy in this room can draw. Let me create that for you again now. 4-foot urinal. The trough is down here. 1 foot above the trough is the cage. The crack is under the cage. There's only one position you can be in to see that crack. Your face has got to be in the trough. All right, that's not so great. And that really didn't bother me so much, but when he told me that, all I could see was his face in that trough. That took away from me the last excuse that I ever had in this program. The visual proof that this program works. Because this guy had no other way of knowing about that crack unless his face had been down there. And now he was standing in front of me with a white shirt and a blue tie, looked like $1,000,000. And I said something in the next moment that I thought I would never say in my life. Never say. I said, Jesus Christ. I said, would you be my sponsor? I thought he was going to give me a big fucking hug and all of that, you know, give me another pack of cigarettes. He said, no. Holy Jesus, I was humiliated. I said, no. I said, I've been listening to you for 3 years about asking for help and willing to help and all of this bullshit. Now I ask, and you say no? And I think, you know, if he hadn't been bigger than me, I would have hit him or something, but he said, don't get excited. He says, I feel good that you asked me, Duff. He said, but in all fairness, he said, I want you to ask me again next week. He said, because I want you to think it over for a week. And I figured, what the hell is there to think over, you know? Sponsor, you know, you can tell me about the steps, you can make me go to meetings, all that bullshit. And I said, why do you have to do that? He said, well, I'll tell you right now what it's going to be like if I'm your sponsor. And then you can think it over. And then next week you can make your decision. And that was fair. You know, I didn't see nothing unfair about that. I said, well, what's it going to be like, Bob? Getting sort of chummy, you know. He said, well, if I become your sponsor, I'm going to make every decision in your life for the next year without any question or comment from you. What? I said, you just mean in A, he says every decision. And I said the only thing that a decent alcoholic would say, you know, fuck you. There was no way I was going to commit to anything like that. No way. Well, that week had to be the toughest week in my life because I changed my mind 1,000 times. I think I changed it 50 times on the way back to the ward that night, you know. I say, every decision in my life. Then 2 seconds later, I'd be saying, well, I ain't really doing so good, you know. Then I say, what the hell does that son of a bitch know, you know? And then it'd be, well, you try it for a while, you know. And all week it's tormented the shit out of me. Now, I really believe, and I'm fully aware that it's impossible to have a spiritual awakening until you take the first 11 steps. I know that. But I believe spiritual things happen to us. And I know of 2 occasions in my life, and this was one of them, when I had no other answer than to be divinely guided spiritually. Because when the next Sunday came, I was still changing my mind, and as I marched over to the meeting that night, I changed it a few times, and during the meeting I said, nah, I wouldn't ask that bastard. And then by the time the next speaker was asking, I was saying, oh, what the hell, what have I got to lose, you know? And then I'd say, that arrogant son of a bitch, screw him, you know. And finally the meeting was over, and I walked out to the parking lot, changed my mind 4 times on the way to the car. He was standing there at the car, and I walked up to him to tell him to stick it right up the farthest part of his ass, and I tried to say them words, and all that came out was, would you be my sponsor? And he said, yes. I used to be scared of an expression in the book. It says, willing to go to any lengths. Because I figured, man, I've let myself in for something now, boy. This guy's going to have me dig a trench from here to France, and, you know. And really, you know, I look back in retrospect now, there was nothing difficult about anything that he told me to do. Some of the things seemed absolutely insane then, but now I know they mean my life. And I'm going to tell you a couple of them because it's important for you to understand this, to do what your sponsor tells you without any question from you, because he has the wisdom, you don't. One of the very first things he did to me, I was sober about 7 weeks, and I was doing fine, you know, and I thought I was doing fine. And I was at a meeting one night, and somebody said, anybody got any problems, anything they want to discuss tonight? And I said, yeah, I got a problem. I said, goddamn AA meeting starts so late. I said, there's a lot of time for me in between getting home from work and coming to the AA meeting, and I said, I live by myself. I said, couldn't I go down to the saloon that I used to hang out with? There's other guys there, and I just drink 7-Up, you know. I said, because I'm bored to death at home. And nobody said anything. And they went on to the next guy, and I was pissed off, you know. You fucking bunch of bastards, you know. We get the meeting ended, we're out in the parking lot, and I'm starting to walk towards the bus line. Somebody says, hey, Duff, come here. And I walked over there. It was my sponsor. He says, is the laundromat still down on the corner from you? And I says, yeah, I go over there every Saturday, wash my clothes. He says, starting tomorrow, he says, you wash your work clothes every night. I figured, this son of a bitch is gone. You know? I said, I don't have to wash my clothes every night. I said, I got 3 or 4 changes. He says, I told you to wash them every goddamn night. Well, I didn't argue with him, and the commitment had got to be a pride thing with me by now. And so I said, all right, I'll be the cleanest goddamn bricklayer in Illinois, you know. But you understand what he was doing. It took me a half an hour to wash him, and it took me a half an hour to dry him. And I had to run like hell to get to the goddamn meeting on time sometimes. He filled that void. He filled that void for me. As a matter of fact, I can say it, here's the stag meeting. About the 4th night I was in there, I met a non-AA chick. It was the first time I got laid on AA, for Christ's sake, you know. So it was a good thing. Now, it didn't have to last too long. It didn't have to last too long because something else came up later. And I didn't realize what he was doing. And the same question came about once when I said the same thing about Saturday mornings. I said, you guys that ain't construction workers don't understand what Saturday, and I'm bullshitting them, you know. I said, on Saturday morning, I said, you got to go around and find out what's going on in the jobs around, where you're going to work this winter, where the foremen are, and who's paying this and who's paying overtime. And I says, I've got to go to some of these saloons. And the meeting broke up, and another guy who was sort of a second sponsor of mine owned a big beauty shop, but he wasn't gay. His wife really ran it. It was a high-fashion place. All the operators were from Germany and had their hair way up in the air like that. Big classy place. Ray Kovich, his name was. He was really a gambler, you know. And he came up to me, and because I had asked, saying, what do you think I should do on Saturday mornings? I'm bored because the meeting don't start till 12:30. And Ray says, hey, Duff. And I owed him a lot of favors because he had lent me a lot of money every time I'd come out of a joint or something. And he said, I got a problem on Saturdays. Could you help me out with it? What is it, Ray? You know, anything you say. And he says, well, Saturday is our busiest day. And he says, we get a lot of women in there to get their hair fixed. He says, during the week, he says, when they're there, he says, we always serve coffee and little pastries to want to get their hair dried. And he says, I always have one of the operators go out to the bakery and get rolls and make the coffee. He said, but on Saturday, all the operators are busy. He said, I got nobody to make the coffee, and I got nobody to go to bakery. He said, would you do that for me? Sure, Ray. So the next Saturday, I go down there. Well, alcoholics don't do things normal. Any other son of a bitch would have bought some fucking donuts and fucking coffee and made it. No. I had to get certain kinds of cakes, certain kind of pastries, little paper things to put underneath them, you know. And I made him buy a silver service and all of that shit. And I used to serve this goddamn coffee to them. It used to be a fun thing, you know, and got a little action out of that, too. But then I had to run like hell, you know, to get to the goddamn AA meeting, you know. And that's what these guys were doing, filling these voids. And a good sponsor will always do them for you. And when I look back now, you know, sometimes I get scared even thinking back. Because we laughed at this. We laughed at making coffee and handing out donuts, and we laughed at washing your clothes, but they very well might have been the difference in me being alive here tonight than being dead. Because I'm quite sure that if they hadn't done those things on my own, I would have said, fuck you guys, I'm going to go hang out in that saloon. You don't know what it's all about. And, you know, you don't hang out in the saloon to drink 7-Up. That's like going in the whorehouse to read the newspaper, you know. But the biggest thing he did to me is responsible for what I am today. The greatest thing, I guess, you know. I love working with alcoholics, and I guess I'm the luckiest guy in AA because I not only do it for a living, a very successful, rewarding living, but I do it in order to maintain my sobriety. It's the thing that's helping 2 of my sons who are on this program, one with 6 years of sobriety and one with 4 years of sobriety, because they work there. My wife, my present wife, is on this program. And as a result of this, my very first wife, the mother of my children, is my present secretary. And we all live together in very close harmony. We're very close. My present wife and my first wife are like two sisters, And it's all due to this program, because they've all learned this program. And the thing that done it all was this privilege that I have of working, and I could say it no other way than on a commercial basis with alcoholics, you know. And that came about as a result of sponsorship. Because the day that Bob took me out of that state hospital, he talked to me that night after I asked him to be a sponsor. He talked to me until 20 after 4 in the morning in that parking lot in his car. And never mentioned to me once or what he was going to do with me. All he did was tell me about himself. Told me all about Skid Row, told me all about Rothschilds, told me all about how he had fucked up his job with General Motors. And then at 20 after 4, as he was walking back to the ward with me because he wanted to square it with the nurse that I was gone all night, he said, I'll meet you at 4:30 tonight out at the front gate. I want you to leave here today. I said, well, I can't do that. I'm signed up for 90 days. It was in the middle of the winter. That's why I was signed up for 90 days. I had no place to go. He said, Duff, you've ran away from this place on 14 different occasions in the past 3 years. He says, so you can run away today. He says, you be there at 4:30. Well, at 4:30, I was there with my shopping bag and my Social Security card because that's all the hell I had, you know. And he didn't show up till about 5 to 5. Another time in my life, 25 minutes. Because when 4:30 came, you know, I demanded that he be there. Where are you, you son of a bitch? You said 4:30. And we alcoholics are like that. And 25 minutes to 5 he wasn't there, and I thought, fuck him, I'm going to go there, get the hell out of this goddamn place, fuck AA, you know. Well, I'll wait another 5 minutes. And I kept putting it off, and I think I was just about ready to cross State Street and go on down the hill to the city and go back into the same pattern as before. He pulled up. Now, what do you think that dumb asshole did? I had no job, I had no money, no cigarettes, I was hungrier than hell, no place to eat, and I didn't know where I was going to go sleep. That's a lot of problems. I had a lot of problems. And where do you think that jackass takes me? To an AA meeting. Here I got a million problems, and he's going to fuck me around in an AA meeting. hour and a half meeting. And I sat in there, you know, thinking, well, bunch of assholes. You know. Of course, I know now, and you know now, that the wheels had been put in motion the day before. That minute I had said, would you be my sponsor, bang, things started to happen. Because as soon as that AA meeting was over, Bob comes walking up to me with a lovely-looking lady, same age as I, you know. He says, this is Hazel Knox, and you're going to be living in her basement for the next 90 days. Well. And on the way home, you're going to stop and pick up her husband, Vernon. He's the district attorney of McHenry County. I wish I could make it sound very dramatic that I had to live in a coal bin down in the basement, but it wasn't like that. They had a very beautiful recreation room, and I slept on a pull-out sofa. And for the next 90 days, I did things that I never thought I would do, you know. I babysat, and I mowed lawns, and I washed windows by AA people, none of whom ever gave me any money in payment. Always a tube of toothpaste, or a bottle of Menins, or 3 packs of cigarettes, or a shirt made in Hong Kong, or some kind of crap like that. And it seemed like 50 guys a day used to come there, and it seemed like every time the phone rang in their house, it was for me. Because all I heard was a guy would come up to the door, I'd answer the door, or somebody answered the door, and he'd say, you Duffy? And I'd say, yeah. He says, my name's Fred, and I'm from Harvard. Your sponsor told me to stop by here tonight and pick you up. I'm going to a meeting in Woodstock. I said, well, I can't. He told me not to, no argument from you. And it was like that for 90 days, 90 days. And I got to be honest, I didn't want you. I was just another run I was making. As soon as I get on my feet, you know, fuck you, I'm going to get back. And that's just how I felt. And I knew that once I could get out and get to work, I'd be okay, screw off. And so finally one night at the meeting, I told my sponsor, I said, you know, I'm getting a little embarrassed hanging around there babysitting and walking dogs and all that shit, and I've been there almost 3 months. I said, how about moving? And he said, fine, yeah. He says, and I said, yeah, I'll go out and get a job tomorrow. He said, no, I already got one for you. And I said, what do you mean you already got one for me? He says, on the way to work every day, I've seen a sign that says, bricklayers wanted. He says, I stopped there the other day and asked the guy if he'd give you a job. And he said, if you're a union, come on in. I said, what the hell are you talking about, bricklayer? I said, I'm a fucking superintendent. He said, you ain't going to be superintendent on this job. You know. So I went to work for an outfit called Sinet Builders, and they put me in a boarding house with a whole bunch of construction workers, and 2 of us were on AA. And I stayed there for about 3 months. And then my life really turned around. The greatest thing happened to me. I didn't know it at that time, just like you know it now. But a meeting there one night, I says, hey, Bob, now how long I got to stay in this goddamn boarding house? I says, I'm always the last guy home. The sheet metal guys get off at 4 o'clock. The electricians get off at 3:30. I said, by the time I get there, they don't have a shower. They just got a bathtub, and the fucking ring is 1 inch thick around the tub every night. And the guy in my room snores, haven't had a good night's sleep. And I says, isn't it time, you know, I said, that I could get in my own place? And he said, let me think about it. Well, that means go ahead and do it to the alcoholic, you know. So, this was in Elgin. Now, I don't know how many, anybody in here know where Elgin, Illinois is? Well, what's great about Elgin, Illinois is not the fact that it was a watch town when they made the Elgin watch, but it's right next to O'Hare Field. And O'Hare Field is the biggest training ground for most airline stewardesses in the world. Women in Elgin, Illinois outnumber men about 15 to 1. Even fat, bald-headed assholes like me score once in a while. You know, you just can't miss. It's paradise, you know. And that must have been when they put up the first singles complex, you know. And it was a place called the Carteret Arms on Highland Avenue. And right after Bob had said he'll think about it, I had rushed down this street and I had seen this sign, vacancy. And I saw the cutest little thing go by with a bottle of wine, a loaf of French bread, and wiggle that butt, you know. And, oh, shit, man, this is it, you know. I was all ready to go out and buy them travel posters and them blue light bulbs and all that, incense and all that. So I went in and I rented that apartment, you know. And I told her, the only way I could cash a check is my sponsor had to sign it also. That's the thing I also do with the kids that I sponsor today, for good reasons. So I lied to the manager. I said, I'm going to use this on a corporation check. I said, got to go and have the treasurer of the corporation sign it also. I said, but I'll be right back. And he said, okay. So I left to walk clear across town to my sponsor's house and get the check signed. And then something happened. My sponsor was playing hanky-pank with a woman on AA, with Hazel Knox, and I didn't have no idea about that. And I'm sort of a little ashamed of this and wish it never happened, but, you know, who am I? Actually had used me in a way to be the thing that could keep them legitimately seeing each other, even though they were both still married. But as I was leaving to go over his house, Hazel come by in her car. And she pulled up alongside me. Said, where you going? So I told her all the good news, you know. She says, and you rented a place already? And I said, yeah. And she said, where? And I said, the Carteret Arms. And she smiled. She says, does Bob know about that? And I said, no, that's where I'm going now to tell him. She said, get in the car. She said, I want to go over there. I want to hear you tell him that. Well, you know what happened. He went off like a rocket. He went straight up in the air. You what? He's that's the last goddamn place you'll be drunk in a week, man. He ranted and raved. And he says, I've already got a place picked out for you. Now, he lived in the best part of town. He lived in a nice neighborhood. So that sounded pretty good. So we got in his station wagon, and we drove out of the best part of town. And we went into the blue-collar section of town and drove right through that. Then we got over there to South Elgin, Jesus Christ, which is the pits, you know. And right across the street from the abandoned Railway Express Agency was an old abandoned house. Only way I can describe it, it looked just like that house in the movie The Munsters, you know. The whole front porch had caved in. There was no glass in the windows. The weeds were up all around it. It was just a horrible looking thing. And I started to laugh, you know. I figured, oh, what a joke. I said, you know, yeah. And he said, this is no joke. He says, my nephew is a real estate agent, and they own this house. And they want to do something with it, but they don't want to do it for about 2 years. And they can't leave it idle like this because the kids are tearing it up. He said he'd make a deal with you that if you'd fix it up a little bit at a time, that you could stay there and all you'd have to do would be to furnish the heat and charge you no rent. I said, what are you kidding? What the hell's the matter with you? He said, what did I tell you about arguing? So I said, all right. And I went in there, and they had brought me some linen and a mattress. And the place was a pig pen. Jesus, guys had shit on the floor. Oh, it was horrible. I can't even describe it. But I had said I'd stay there. But I figured, well, I'll just stay here for a couple of nights because he's just testing me, you know. Nobody would expect you to live in these conditions, you know. And I had always been bitching at AA about having so much time in my hands. That was always the thing that they... So after they left that night, and we went out and got a pizza, and I come back, and we fucked around and got the lights on, and I wanted to clean up before I went to bed. I wanted to take a shower, and the fucking shower didn't work, and the goddamn bathtub and sinks was more rust than it was white, and the stool was filthy. And I tried to clean it. I scrubbed, and I couldn't get it clean. So the next day, coming home from work, I said, well, you can't clean that goddamn thing, and if I'm going to be there 2 or 3 days, I'll paint the son of a bitch. At least it'll be clean, you know. So I stopped at some cheap-ass hardware store and I bought a couple of cans of paint. And I painted the bathroom. And the next night I painted the kitchen. And then somebody brought me a bed and some cardboard to put in the windows so the rain wouldn't come in. And I had a bedroom now. And I had a kitchen. Then I figured, what the fuck, I might as well stay here till the summer's out anyhow. And I painted the dining room, but it was empty. And I went to an auction, a farm auction one Saturday to kill some time. And I bought a dining room set. If I could have it today, it's probably worth $50,000. It was for 16 people. It had all the chairs, one of them tables with about 9 leaves, the big buffet, the china closet, the whole goddamn thing. And I brought it home and I put it in the dining room. Somebody brought me a couch, another guy brought me an overstuffed chair. Somebody told me where there was another couch and I went and got that. One of the women members brought me some curtains and I put them up in the bedroom. I was sweet on a little girl in the meeting, and one Saturday she came down there and put curtains in the kitchen. That house had 7 bedrooms. Inside the next 4 months I furnished every one of them. Painted every damn room in there, put all the glass back in the windows. I had 2 carpenters come from a job that I was the superintendent on and fixed my front porch in exchange for me building a fireplace for them in the house that they were building. Inside of almost 7 months I had that house in shape. And all the while something was happening that I wasn't aware of. There was always guys there. 6 o'clock at night before, fucking guys from AA, you know. You gonna go to a meeting tonight? Come on, right over with us, you know. Or there was no, hey, let's sit down and have a meeting. You know, let's talk something tonight. Saturday morning, fuck, those guys there all the time, in and out all day. Sunday morning, guys in, and I used to get pissed off. How am I gonna get a chick in here, you fucking guys? You see what I had created, and I had no idea in the world that I had done it. It was the beginning of a 12-step house or an Alano club, whatever the hell it had become a center for all of these guys. And we were going to Joliet prison every Thursday night, my sponsor and I. And we're sitting there one night, and a black fellow was the inmate secretary of the group, a guy by the name of Cleo. And Cleo gets up to give a little talk, and he says, I want to thank the whole group. He says, I'm leaving tomorrow. He said, I've got my date. And he says, you guys have all been great coming here for years. And he says, I haven't learned too much, he says, but I've learned a little bit about honesty. And he says, I want to be honest with you outside guys. I really think I'm going to drink as soon as I get out of here, because it's been 11 years since I had a drink, and I really want one bad. And he said, I don't have a job, and I don't have no place to go. And about that time, my sponsor gave me a shot in the goddamn ribs, nearly broke my fucking ribs in half. I said, what the hell is the matter with you? And he said, didn't you hear what Cleo said? I said, oh, he said he's getting out tomorrow. And oh. So I went up to Cleo after the meeting, and I told Cleo about my house. I said, Cleo, I'll come down tomorrow after work if you can wait, you know, till I get off of work. And you can come home with me, you can stay with me. I said, no big deal there, feed one more guy. And I said, as soon as you find a job, you can get your own place and go on your way. And he said, oh, thanks a lot, thanks a lot. I wish I could make it sound like a story that belongs in the big book, but it wasn't to be, it wasn't to be. I came down the next day and got Cleo, brought him home. First night he left the next morning, took my fucking radio, my watch, and every bit of cash I had around it. I haven't seen that son of a bitch since. But someday I'm going to tell that story at an AA meeting, and Cleo's going to say, yeah, I am. Yeah, I am. I know that, you know. A couple of days later, somebody brought a guy in from the state hospital, said this guy needs a place to stay for a couple of days. Another guy needs a place to stay. Give this guy a break. Let him stay with you for a while. He gets at it. And before long, I had all these fucking rooms full. And I'm the only guy working. But was it fun? I didn't think it was so much fun then, but you know how we used to eat? The stores were all closed on Sunday. So every Saturday night, we'd have to go to all the supermarkets all around. The A&P and the big markets, because they closed down. And we'd get the bologna ends and all the ends of the cold meat that they had left over and scraps that they didn't want to carry over the weekend. We'd go to the produce department, and that guy would give us the produce and the stale bread that would be 3 days old. And they got to know us so good they'd give us the dented cans and some cans that weren't dented. And then we hadn't learned too much about honesty yet, so we used to boost a little shit to it. And then AA guys would bring in stuff, you know. And I tell you, it was the greatest year and a half of my life, you know. And I bitched all during it. I bitched the whole goddamn year. And one night we was coming down out of the goddamn meeting hall, you know, and my sponsor was right behind me. And he says, how come you didn't bring up about your birthday? And I said, what? I thought he meant my natal birthday. He said, don't you know how long you've been sober? And I says, yeah. He says, 13 months, isn't it? He says, well, you had a birthday already. I says, well, I never really knew about that. He says, so I release you from any obligation that you have to me. He says, you no longer have to be, you know, do everything I tell you. And I broke out into fucking sweat. I said, what the hell are you talking about? I've got more problems now than I ever had. I got 7 guys that are drunk staying in the friggin' house. I got a job. I'm trying to pay on the car. I picked up alimony. Now I'm paying child support. I'm making financial amends, and you're going to drop me? You prick. You know? And then they decided to have a little party for me the next meeting night. And I was full of self-pity because 2 of the guys had got drunk and set fire to one of the beds in the house. And I was mad at this son of a bitch. And I had told them at the meeting, I said, when I get home this Saturday, I'm throwing a whole fucking bunch of them out of there. And I did have a bunch of cruddy assholes in there at that particular time. And I said, from now on, fuck it, I'm going to rent it out to regular people, not alcoholics. I said, there ain't been nobody come in that place for a year that stayed sober. And the place went dead silent. And they all looked at me. And then it dawned on me, fuck, I was sober. I wasn't there to sober them up. Them son of a bitches was keeping me sober. And then I knew at that minute that I was going to work with alcoholics for the rest of my life, no matter what. I didn't do it overnight because I was a general construction superintendent and time really wouldn't permit it, I guess, to go into all of that. But I couldn't make the decision in Illinois because my ego was in my way. You know, I'm not trained for anything else, and I don't have an education where I could go work in an office or anything like that. And I have no engineering skills, but everything I learned about construction and high-rise, I learned by doing it with my hands, you know, and I've been in that business since I was 12 years old because I was indentured to my grandfather as an apprentice. And finally in Hawaii, I was sent over there to, if you ever been in Hawaii, you know where the Ala Moana Shopping Center is? Well, I was sent over there to build that because I had built one in Milwaukee, Wisconsin that's called Capitol Court. And Ala Moana is an identical of Capitol Court. And the reason I was sent over there is because I'm what they call a full mason. I've experienced in every form of masonry there is, you know, not only stone and brick, but all kinds of tile, glass, block, plaster, masonry, and cement finishing. And those 2 shopping centers were financed by the Portland Cement Company as an advertising gimmick. Because every form of masonry that was up to 11 particular days is used in both of those shopping centers. So they use it a lot as a selling point for selling their cement. But I was going to miss the power, you know, and the money. I was making awful big money. I had a wonderful crew of men, and we always finished 30, 45 days ahead of schedule, which always got me a pretty good bonus. And I was staying sober, but I was miserable. If you're sober and you have to do what you don't want to do, Jesus, it's hardly worth staying sober for sometimes, you know. I used to sit there full of self-pity playing them Peggy Lee songs, you know, is this all there is, and what the fuck's the sense in being sober if I got to get up every goddamn morning and go do this shit and go up 82 stories and I might fall off tonight. But I didn't know what the hell what am I going to do if I quit, you know. And then like Keith was telling me tonight about his recent experience, you know, I sat down and I prayed. I prayed on a plane going from Honolulu to San Francisco. I had gotten in a fight after an AA meeting in a restaurant. You know, had nothing to do with AA. I had some bad experiences in World War II with the Japanese, and at that time I guess I wasn't mature enough yet to handle it, you know, and I had no idea that Hawaii was about 90% Japanese, you know, even though they're Japanese American. And I had gotten in a little trouble, and I wound up in jail that night. And as soon as they found out who I was, they let me out, and I had to make restitution in this restaurant, guarantee it anyhow, but my company did that. But I called up my sponsor, and from Waikiki, and I told him what I did. And I says, I don't want to work over here anymore. I don't want to build this fucking shopping center and, you know, and fuck construction. What should I do? And he said the magic words, you know, and I never argued with him. He just said, how far are you from the airport? I said, I don't really know. He said, you got enough money for a cab? He said, yeah. He said, well, hop in the cab, go by the YMCA. I was staying at the Pali YMCA. It shows you that I wasn't fucking around. Pick up your gear, and he said, get on the next plane to Chicago. I got on the plane to Chicago, and I prayed to God for some kind of direction. And I was panicky, and I was scared to death, you know. I said, what the fuck am I going to do now? I'm almost 40 years old, you know, you just can't change now, and I had obligations, you know, still trying to make restitution. And I said, God, you got to help me. And we landed in Chicago, in San Francisco, just to refuel was what they said. But then they had found out they had problem with the plane. They said, you can't get a plane now until tomorrow morning at such and such a time for Chicago. I opened up my 24-hour book. I don't know if has anybody got one by chance in your pocket right now? Look for a moment, please. To make a decision, and I needed to make a decision. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to get out, and I wanted to work with alcoholics, but I didn't have the guts, and I didn't have the courage. And I just blindly opened that book. And my natal birthday is October the 27th. And I don't have my glasses. Would you read October the 27th for me out loud? I haven't got it on here.
Thought for the day. My name's Ed, I'm an alcoholic. Seventh, I can help other alcoholics. I am of some use in the world. I have a purpose in life. I am worth something at last. My life has a direction and a meaning. All that feeling of futility is gone. I can do something worthwhile. God has given me a new lease on life so that I can help other alcoholics. He has let me live through all the hazards of my alcoholic life to bring me at last to a place of real usefulness in the world. He has let me live for this. This is my opportunity and my destiny. I am worth something. Will I give as much of my life as I can to AA? Meditation for the day. All of us have our own battle to win. The battle between the material view of life and the spiritual view. Something must guide our lives. Will it be wealth, pride, selfishness, greed, or will it be faith, honesty, purity, unselfishness, love, and service? Each one has a choice. We can choose good or evil. We cannot choose both. Are we going to keep striving until we win the battle? If we win the victory, we can believe that even God in his heaven will rejoice. Prayer for the day. I pray that I may choose the good and resist the evil. I pray that I will not be a loser in the battle for righteousness.
And from that moment, from that very moment, and I don't say this to be corny or anything like that, I actually felt a surge of some kind inside of me. I felt myself get strong. What I really think I felt was fear leaving me. Because from that moment on, I have never been afraid in this program to do anything that I thought was right. And everything I have done, I opened up a business with $17 in my pocket and a red-hot Visa card. And that program was just tried to be bought by an outfit from Orange County, ComCare, for $4.5 million. And I paid $150,000 for it. I have done nothing in that program up there that isn't in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. I have abided to the letter by every tradition and every concept of this program, and I have tried to live my own personal life exactly as this program has dictated to me. And since then, my life, there's just nothing wrong with my life. Nothing ever seems to go wrong. And that's why I love AA. And that's why when I say AA is my life, I mean it is my life, you know. I'm not saying that to fill out a sentence or to impress you or it's supposed to be dead. When I think of what has happened to me and what's going to happen to you and what has already happened to you, I shudder. I shudder. And for you new guys that are here, bouncing around with 4 months, 6 months, and 7 months, Jesus Christ, if you only knew. If you only knew. This is the greatest adventure that you're ever going to be part of. The greatest adventure. If I had it within my realm or whatever, some kind of a mystic power to hold a crystal ball in front of me right now and tell you what's going to take place in your life if you don't drink, and if you just make a daily attempt at practicing these principles in all of your affairs, you would never believe what I tell you here tonight. You'd think I was smoking a joint or something. You'd say, he's got to be crazy. He's got to be crazy. But yet I know it. Don knows it. Keith knows it. And other guys in here know it. They know what's going to happen to you because we have seen it happen. And now you're part of it. Now you're part of it. An adventure. The greatest adventure that man has ever been endowed or allowed to be part of it. And I guess you have been chosen as we have been chosen. I know I've talked too long, but it helped me a hell of a lot, to tell you the truth. So thanks an awful lot, and we'll see you the next time we get together here.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.